I am Paankhi Agrawal, visiting faculty at Department of Sociology, SNDT University, Mumbai. Subject: Political Sociology. Under this subject, we will be looking at Unit 2, Political Culture. Next, organization. As we have seen earlier, it includes schools and other educational institutions, religious institutions, workplaces, etc. Let us now look at school or educational institutions. The educational institutions play a vital role in socializing the children and in acting as agents of political socialization. They include schools, colleges and universities. Schools are the major agents of political socialization, which socialize the children directly and indirectly. Direct socialization takes place as the school curriculum deals with the nationalistic values which help the students in developing a sense of pride and a sense of loyalty to their country and to their governmental system. Indirect socialization takes place when a student becomes politically socialized by the influences he derives from his school experience. College and university education may also bring in new values and help in the formation of more radical political attitudes. These educational institutions influence the social and political attitudes of the students and thereby help in maintaining the political culture. Next, we look at religious institutions. In every society, religion plays a significant role in political socialization. The parents take their children to religious institutions such as the church, madrasa, to temples at their tender ages. As we know, religious institutions have their particular political ideology. Also, in religious places, children listen to the philosophy of the priest who has his own political ideology. It has a deep impact on the young mind. Next, workplace. Workplace and nature of employment is also important in influencing political behavior of a person. Her attitudes towards the political institutions and structure get shaped with the nature of employment. The person's attitudes towards political institutions and structures get shaped with the nature of employment, his colleagues and their political ideology, and his employer's behavior, etc. At workplace, one learns the art and skill of organizing trade union works, strikes, bargaining with employer for better wages or working conditions, etc. Next, we look at mass media, which includes radio, television, press, internet. These inculcate different set of values in an individual and accordingly shape their orientations. The role of mass media in political socialization is increasing. They provide information about different events, convey symbols and express critical views on several topics. They provide a good deal of political information to the individuals and thereby exert a great influence on individual personality. They also provide information about the immediate and specific political events which act over the long run to shape the individual's basic cognitive map. The mass media affects young as well as old, rural people as well as urban. Of course, the role of mass media is dependent upon ownership and the interests which they represent. For example, the Marathi newspaper Samna is a mouthpiece of a regional political party in Maharashtra. Therefore, the nature of mass media is not uniform in all societies. Mass media are not the primary socializers in society. They rather reinforce the already established orientations. They inform and interpret in order to maintain the status quo. Section 3.8.4 Specialized Political Input Structure. Specialized input structures act as an agent of political socialization. It includes political parties, interest groups, as well as trade unions. These input structures can very well be termed as secondary or group. The last sentence that I read from mass media was, they inform and interpret in order to maintain the status quo. We will now look at specialized political input structures. Specialized input structure acts as an agent of political socialization. It includes the political parties, interest groups, as well as the trade unions. These input structures can very well be termed as secondary groups. The membership of these groups equips one with skill, information, and predisposition which are very much essential for political participation. Political parties are clearly political in nature. Each political party tries to socialize the electorate in a way it likes them to participate in the political process. On the other hand, the trade unions represent those groups which are established for non-political purposes. Basically, their aim is to look after the material benefits of their members, but at the same time, they involve their members in political action and give them political education. Interest groups are also not political in character, but their participation in routine affairs gives their members opportunities to develop a political orientation. Next, we have the specialized political output structures. Different political output structures like the legislature, the executive, the bureaucracy, the court, etc., in short the government as a whole, constitute an important agent of political socialization. An individual's continuous experience of government through her direct contact with the governmental output functions and governmental personnel and her knowledge of what the government stands and works for is likely either to reinforce her ideas and attitudes or cancel. An individual's continuous experience of government through her direct contact with the governmental output functions and governmental personnel and her knowledge of what the government stands and works for is likely either to reinforce her ideas and attitudes or to alter them substantially. The role of each government in improving the lot of the people, both economic and political, is a big step towards political socialization. Thus, politically conscious people leave their old political parties and either join some already existing party or form some new political party of their own. Next, we will look at the role of intellectuals in political system. Intellectual is the term used for those members of society who are devoted to the development of original ideas and are engaged in creative intellectual pursuits. They provide the intellectual leadership for the remainder of the intelligentsia, which refers to the members of the educated stratum of society, mostly with professional or managerial occupations, who have an interest in ideas and a certain degree of consciousness of themselves as a social stratum. They are considered as crucial agents of political modernization. Political theories of Pareto, Mosca, and Michels confirms their contribution. These sections of society provide basis to political modernization through their views and ideas. They promote or oppose these trends. Even bureaucracy remains as a part of it. Thus, they retain a substantial influence on the process of political modernization. Now we will be looking at interest groups. In nearly every liberal democratic political system, there exist several organized groups representing the various specific interests of its people. They interact with the government and compete with each other. The term interest group is used for a group organized to secure certain objectives which its members value or regard as beneficial to themselves. Interest groups frequently represent particular economic interests of particular sections of society, for example, organized labor, large manufacturers, farmers, small businessmen, professional organizations, etc. Interest groups could be classified into three categories. 1. Associations based on traditional social structures such as caste, religion, language, or tribe. 2. Associations formed in the economic centers like industry, commerce, business, agriculture, labor, and modern social associations involving journalists and legal professions. 3. Institution-based associations and service organizations like the civil services, defense services, police, paramilitary services, public sector employees, and educational personnel, etc. It is essential to note that several smaller regional and local level parties and socio-cultural associations do not constitute interest and pressure groups. At the most, Interest groups of industry, business and commerce, agriculture use the techniques of pressure groups. Significance: interest groups are organized on the basis of common goals and share similar views. They try to build the public opinion in favor of their interests and seek the support of party leaders, legislators, and bureaucracy in the vigorous pursuit of their goals. Although groups interact with each other by cooperating, their activities nonetheless are essentially competitive in nature. They compete with each other to pass, repeal, or prevent laws and regulations detrimental to their concern. The entire process of reconciliation of various demands of various sectors through bargaining, negotiations, and compromise provides the necessary inputs into the process of evolving public policy in democracies. This competition between the groups, along with the participation of political parties and government, results in the emergence of public policy. Such a policy based on the democratic and open competition of various interests with the government as the arbitrator is the best available policy. Next, we will look at pressure groups. When interest groups exert pressure on the government in order to obtain laws and administrative measures in favor of their specific interests, then they are known as pressure groups. All pressure groups are interest groups, but all interest groups are not and need not be pressure groups. Pressure on the government is exerted in a variety of ways, that is, through riots, strikes, organized violence, social movements, or even peaceful presentation of petitions. Pressure group can be defined as a group that attempts to influence legislative or governing agencies on behalf of its own special interests and the interests of a larger public that it represents. According to VOK, pressure groups are non-political groups. Though they engage in politics, their politics is not directly of electoral politics. Though they may help some parties, they do not fight elections. Most pressure groups develop and maintain their own lobbies for influencing legislation. The existence of pressure groups of varying types is often regarded as an important indicator of the extent of political pluralism within a society. The role of pressure groups in influencing the legislatures. This role is evident at three levels, that is, elections, party, and parliament. Firstly, the pressure groups concentrate their efforts on the electoral system by aiding agencies that may work for their advantage at the time of elections. This is accomplished by creating strong and favorable public opinion for a particular political party or its candidates. Secondly, they help the parties of their choice by contributing substantially to its electoral funds and thus win tickets for their favorable parliamentary candidates. By this process, they are successfully infiltrating their agents into the legislative chamber for a more direct and effective participation in the decision-making process of the highest representative body. Characteristics of Indian pressure groups. 1. The pressure groups are primarily organized on the basis of caste, community, religion, and region. 2. The majority of pressure groups in India are controlled by or affiliated with political parties. 3. Pressure groups in India play a limited role in the formulation of public policies. 4. The professional pressure groups enjoy relative autonomy than the political parties. 5. They often resort to violence and strikes and hartals to achieve their objectives. 6. They mainly target the bureaucracy and administrative establishment. In India, majority of pressure groups are linked to one or the other party and are called parties behind the parties. Their importance has grown with mounting pressure on the political system and fragmentation of dominant party system. They have often created chaotic situations and paralyzed the fate of government. The pressure groups have lost their credibility and population sympathy due to their negative role. However, some of them have adopted a positive outlook to fulfill the interests of their members. In any case, the pressure groups in India have not only influenced the formulation of public policies but also the whole political process. Many times, they have forced the government to consider the demands and address genuine problems. Significance of pressure groups. The role of pressure group is determined by the political culture of the country. Pressure groups enable more individuals to participate in the process of policy making and provide a continuous and open channel of communication between the people and the government. This helps the administration and the legislators to secure information on facts and attitudes. Any democratic government would like to evaluate the popular reaction to its intended policy. Pressure groups provide that integral link. They contribute to the sustenance of the modern representative system. In the wide spectrum of the pressure and interest groups, there are also certain other interest groups which strive for the larger human causes like peace, environment protection, racial equality, human rights, human development, and peaceful international relations. They seek to build an enlightened public opinion by promoting an all-party consensus, by enlisting the support and cooperation of various opinion leaders in society, and by appealing to human reason and compassion. Thus, the organized interest groups in a political system not only constitute its vital elements, but also play a very significant role in the political process as a whole. Summary. Political culture is the sum of basic attitudes, orientations, beliefs, values, sentiments, emotions, and norms of the individuals towards the political objects, that is, the political system. History, geography, socio-economic factors, ethnic factors, etc. are the important determinants of political culture. The term political socialization is closely related with the political culture of the society. In modern times, almost all the states have fully recognized the importance of political socialization in shaping and molding the attitudes, opinions and values of individuals. Family, peer groups, mass media, etc. are the important agencies of political socialization. The complexity of political life has witnessed the rise of many groups referred to as pressure groups, interest groups, or influence groups. These are voluntary organizations with a particular interest. They act as medium through which the function of articulation is performed in a political system. They constitute links of communication between the citizen and the government. They try to build public opinion in their favor and do not seek to capture power but only to influence decisions. Now we will raise certain questions for self-study. 1. Explain the term political culture. 2. Define political socialization and explain the role of interpersonal agencies in political socialization. 3. Discuss the significance of interest groups and pressure groups in Indian politics. 4. Write notes on political socialization, role of mass media as an agency of political socialization, role of intellectuals, pressure groups, interest groups. The following can be the books for reference. 1. B.K. Nagla, Political Sociology, published by Rawat Publications in New Delhi. 2. Saroj Kumar Jina, Political Sociology, published by Anmol Publications, New Delhi in the year 2002. 3. R.K. Garg's Modern Textbook of Political Sociology, published by Swastik Publications, New Delhi in the year 2013. Today we shall be looking at Unit 3, Sociology of Indian Society. Under this unit, we will be taking up Lesson 1, which is History of Development of Sociology in India. The content outlined for this lesson is as follows. Introduction, colonial background of sociology in India, which includes the Orientalist, the missionary, and the administrative schools of thought, indigenous social thought, development of Indian sociology in the pre-1950s era, then in the post-1950 era, and more recent developments in Indian sociology in 1970s and 80s. Professionalization and institutionalization of sociology, relevance, indigenization and sociology for India. Summary. After studying this lesson, you will be able to describe the historical roots of Indian sociology, explain the three major approaches of Western thinkers to Indian society and culture during the colonial period, delineate and critique the work of the pioneers and modernizers of sociology in India, discuss the developments that took place in sociology in 1970s and 80s, describe the growth of associations and institutions across India that played a role in establishing sociology as a prestigious discipline, discuss the issues of relevance and indigenization in context of Indian sociology. Introduction. Sociology, like any other discipline, has its roots in society. While sociology is a social science that aspires for objectivity in its study of society, the trends and events in society also impinge upon the intellectual activities and knowledge generation within the discipline. The broader socio-political and economic context influences social thought among the practitioners of the discipline, the availability of funds to set up institutions and conduct research, and the prestige that comes to be associated with ideas and concepts. Thus, unlike the natural sciences, social sciences, including sociology, cannot be seen irrespective of the history and culture of societies under study. Classical sociology emerged in the West and had its roots in the turmoil of the 18th century. European society had come under the grip of the Enlightenment thought, which was characterized by the belief that people could understand and control the outside world by means of reason and empirical research. On the political front, a series of dramatic political upheavals following the French Revolution had resulted in chaos and disorder. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the process of industrial revolution had contradictory impact on society. With great wealth production, there was increasing inequality between social classes and the exploitation of workers. These intellectual, political and economic developments and problems of contemporary society preoccupied the main figures in classical sociology, such as Auguste Comte, Karl Marx, Max Weber, Emil Durkheim and George Simmel. The dissemination of sociology from Europe to different countries was not a simple imposition of Western theories on new territories, but it involved the dialectical interaction of sociological traditions with the cultural and historical conditions of that society. The contributions from the East have in many ways redefined the contours of sociology. In this lesson, we will look at the emergence and development of sociology in India. This essentially involves looking at the social and political context in which sociological thought developed, the social thought of Indian scholars, that is, their perception of Indian tradition, social structure and social processes, institutionalization of sociology through establishment of its department in different universities and setting up of professional bodies and journals for dissemination of knowledge. First, we shall look at the emergence of sociology in the pre-independence period and link it up with colonial thought. Colonial background of sociology in India. In India, the roots of sociology and of its kindred discipline anthropology can be traced to colonialism. The colonial period saw a massive movement of assimilation of knowledge about Indian traditions, culture and social institutions. There emerged several European writings on Indian society, both in India and in the West. Many of the ideas, concepts and methods of colonial knowledge were absorbed in sociological thought in India. Anthropologist Bernard Cohn has outlined three major approaches to study of Indian society that began to emerge from 1760 onwards. He discusses the social context in which the various types of knowledge developed in the colonial period and how they were linked to values, interests, assumptions and the roles that foreign observers played in India. The first one is the Orientalist approach. In the post-Plassey period, British began to acquire knowledge of major Indian languages such as Sanskrit and Persian texts. This allowed them to access the several religious and historical texts produced in India. In this, they sought the help of Pandits and Shastris, who are the scholars of Hindu scriptures, in translating and interpreting these texts. Some European Orientalists include Alexander Dow, N. B. Haldid, William Jones, Max Muller, etc. The following are the characteristics of Orientalist thought. First, the Orientalists studied Indological texts which they believed were accurate guides to the custom, tradition, manners and beliefs of Indians. Thus, their approach was based on a textual view of society. Second, India was posited by them as the other of the West, since Indian traditions, ethos, values, culture and social institutions were seen as being distinct from those of the West and which corresponded to a past stage in the history of Western civilization. Third, Orientalists tended to romanticize the Indian traditions, regarding them as positive and as representing a more moral and consensual way of life than that found in the West. Orientalist thought had several implications for the understanding of Indian society. Under the Orientalist view, there developed a picture of Indian society as being static, timeless and spaceless. The actual reality and everyday life of people was subordinated to a normative view prescribed by static scriptural traditions. It led to the view that the Brahmins were the dominant social group in India, since the texts generally spoke about the sacredness of the Brahmin class. This view ignored the distribution of political and economic power among the other groups in society. The second approach to the study of Indian society under the colonial period is the missionary view. A distinct perspective towards India emerged among the Christian missionaries and evangelicals who arrived in India from Europe, mainly during the colonial period. As a byproduct of their evangelical activities, they contributed to the empirical study of Indian society. While the Orientalists exhibited a sense of reverence towards Indian cultural beliefs and practices, the missionaries expressed a sense of disdain for them. They believed that the caste system, the customary laws and government, and Brahmanical despotism had resulted in the degradation of Hindu society. They were critical of practices such as sati, parda, child slavery, veneration of cow, idol worship, and the caste system. They ridiculed the Sanskrit texts, which were seen as the ideological sources of these evils. Charles Grant, one of the early evangelicals to come to India, and who served the East India Company's government, referred to the people of Hindustan as degenerate and base. However, like the Orientalists, the missionaries identified Indian society as being primarily Hindu. Thus, for them, the solution to problems of Indian society was elimination of Hinduism. A consequence of this logic was popularization of Christianity and encouragement of conversion among Hindus in order to escape the ills of Hinduism. The third view under the colonial period is the administrative view. The British administrators came to realize that a proper grasp over the Indian social reality was needed for smooth functioning of the administration. Knowledge of local customs, values and institutions was needed so that social and institutional reforms could be introduced without arousing disquiet among the natives. Colonial administrators turned social scientists and provided descriptive and analytical studies of Indian society. For example, B. H. Baden-Powell's Land System of British India, Herbert Risley's The Peoples of India, Studies of Castes and Tribes by Nesfield, William Crook, E. Thurston and J. H. Hutton, Work on Village Communities by Henry Maine and Baden-Powell. Also, the various Censuses conducted during the colonial period provided a range of data on the social milieu of the country. The studies produced by British administrators tended to exaggerate the segmentary cleavages in Indian society and neglected the organic linkages between the various sections of society. For example, caste groups were studied as discrete entities which had specific traditions and customs of their own, but there was little emphasis on studying the caste hierarchy which encompassed several groups. Also, structures such as caste and village community were seen to be static, whereas in reality they had undergone several changes over time. Despite its shortcomings, the administrative view was the most influential among the colonial systems of thought and had a considerable impact on sociological thought in its phase of institutionalization and professionalization in India. Indigenous social thought. Besides colonial systems of thought, there were concerted attempts by Indians to understand social realities. According to Dhanagare, there developed an indigenous social imagination among several Indian thinkers in the 19th century who were becoming increasingly exposed to the forces of modernization and Western social sciences. For instance, Auguste Comte's writings on positivism had influenced Renaissance thought in Bengal. These thinkers included religious and social reformers such as Raja Ram Mohan Roy, K.C. Sen, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Ram Krishna Paramhansa, Vivekananda, and political thinkers such as Dadabhai Nauroji, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, G.K. Gokhale, and economic policy makers such as R.C. Dutt and M.G. Ranade. The Indian thinkers tried to revive and reinterpret Indian tradition. Different thinkers had to varying degrees celebrated Western values such as liberalism, humanitarianism, egalitarianism, and used them to develop a critique of colonialism. The indigenous pre-sociological intellectual trends had only a marginal influence on later developments in Indian sociology. But the nationalist consciousness that these thinkers aroused had a bearing on the search for identity and relevance among the pioneering sociologists in India. Development of Indian sociology. It is against the background of colonial and nationalist thought that there emerged the discipline of sociology in India. We will now look at the developments in this discipline in the pre-1950 years. This is the first phase of Indian sociology which roughly coincides with the years 1910 to 50. The sociologists associated with this phase, especially with 1920s and 30s, have been termed as pioneers. They include B.N. Seal, B.K. Sarkar, G.S. Ghurye, Radha Kamal Mukherjee, D.P. Mukherjee, S.V. Ketkar, B.N. Dutt, and K.P. Chattopadhyay. Most sociologists in this period came from urban middle classes and had studied in European universities. They had acquired training in Western systems of knowledge and had come to be influenced by the writings of Western classical sociologists. But their work is not marked by simple application of Western theories and concepts to the Indian context. According to sociologist Yogendra Singh, their concern with Western sociology or social sciences was dialectical and interactive rather than imitative. This was mainly because of their belief that the Indian tradition and culture was unique and that the content, methodology, and value premises of sociology that had developed in the West could not be uncritically applied to Indian conditions. Also, the pioneers sought to study India in her own right rather than an other of the West, as had been postulated by several colonial scholars. They also questioned the thesis of a single path to modernity or of development in which the East was to catch up with the West by imitating the West. Moreover, they attempted to study India not as a static entity, but in a dynamic historical perspective. The issue of a unique Indian identity was of great concern to them. They were acutely aware of their identity as Indians first and foremost, and then of their professional identity as sociologists. The principal question asked by them was, what constitutes the Indian tradition? What was the character of the Indian civilization? Thus, we can see that the first generation of sociology in India is very much linked to the search for a cultural identity. The pioneers analyzed fundamental social institutions such as caste, joint family, untouchability, religion and sect. They published ethnographic accounts of particular groups, recorded folklore and depicted the material culture of tribes and rural people. Indology, that is, the study of the uniqueness of Indian society and culture, formed a main trend in sociology of the pioneering generation. The main sources of information were the religious and literary Sanskrit texts, which led to the dominance of textual perspective in this period. Survey research was less common. Macroanalytical studies were preferred over microsociological and social anthropological research. The pioneers were not as concerned with the professionalization of sociology or of its establishment as a scientific discipline. Ramakrishna Mukherjee has therefore termed the work of the pioneers as proto-sociology. That is, it was a precursor to the actual professionalization of sociology in India. The deeper and more immediate concern of the pioneers was with social relevance of the discipline. They were critical of colonial rule as they were deeply influenced by the nationalist discourse of Indian social reformers. They wanted to play a role in building a knowledge base that could be instrumental in nationalist and reform struggles. I.P. Desai notes that sociology in India in its early phase was future-oriented and change-oriented. Thus, knowledge production was to be in the service of society and oriented towards promoting basic changes in the structure and tradition of Indian society. According to Yogendra Singh, sociologists of the pioneer generation were torn between two sets of principles. On one hand were the principles of objectivity and reflexivity and generalization, which were basic to a paradigm of sociology that had a universal appeal. On the other hand, there were issues of social relevance which bound it deeply with the ideology of indigenous national liberation and cultural reform movements. Now we shall look at the development of sociology after 1950. The first 2 decades after independence were very productive for Indian sociology. The sociologists associated with these decades are sometimes called modernizers, since their sociology was concerned with addressing the needs and problems of a modernizing nation, and also because they played a key role in the professionalization of sociology in India. Some of these modernizers include M.N. Srinivas, K.M. Kapadia, S.C. Dubey, A.K. Saran, and N.K. Bose. After 1950s, there was a substantive and methodological shift in the discipline. This shift took place against the backdrop of internal and external conditions in which India found itself in the first 2 decades after its independence. Post-Second World War was a period of ascendance of America in global geopolitics. This was an era of Cold War. America was interested in supporting development work in newly independent countries so as not to lose them to the influence of communist countries like Soviet Russia and China. Thus, American involvement in democratic and modernization projects in third world countries, including India, increased. India came to depend a great deal on the knowledge, guidance, and capital provided by America. American assistance to Indian society, which was predominantly agrarian, focused on increasing agricultural productivity and improvement of government administrative structures and practices. American assistance was critical in the establishment of a chain of agricultural universities and community development projects. According to sociologist D. N. Dhanagare, economic and political connections between America and India translated into concrete social science relationships. Research in social and economic development was undertaken by Indian social scientists. Research in social and economic development was undertaken by Indian social scientists with the aid of American government and various American foundations such as Ford Foundation. As a consequence, the character of American sociology came to influence Indian sociology in 1950s and 60s. Corresponding to the dominance of America in world affairs, American sociology gained more prominence than European sociological thought. While European sociology was anchored in moral philosophy, historical reasoning, and critical consciousness, American sociology had its roots in positivism, empiricism, and pragmatism. American sociology was more concerned with development of operational tools, technology of research, and methodology of social sciences in general. Thus, the focus shifted from philosophical, critical, dialectical, and historical reasoning to empirical studies and statistical analysis. The influence of American sociology on Indian sociology can be discerned from the following trends in sociological studies in India in the 1950s and 60s. First, village studies. Since development of rural society of India was seen as an important component of national development, and since funds were made available for research on Indian villages and ways to improve agrarian productivity, many sociologists and social anthropologists undertook village studies. Dhanagare provides a more instrumentalist view of the rise of village studies. According to him, it was primarily the state official patronage and the Ford Foundation largesse which attracted a number of sociologists and social anthropologists to this area of study. They could obtain funds for research projects to study Indian villages. Large-scale surveys were conducted to assess and evaluate the effectiveness of the community development programs for the purpose of administrators. The village studies in India were influenced by the studies of peasant society and culture in Mexican villages conducted by American social anthropologist Robert Redfield. Some of the more well-known studies include Oscar Lewis's Village Life in Northern India, that is in 1951. Some of the more well-known studies include Oscar Lewis's Village Life in Northern India, 1951, M.S. Srinivas's India's Villages, 1955, S.C. Dubey's Indian Village, 1955, F.G. Bailey's Caste and Economic Frontier, 1958, Milton Singer's Traditional India, Structure and Change, 1959. These were largely descriptive studies from a holistic perspective, though towards the end of 1950s, more analytical village studies began to be undertaken. The emphasis on village studies marked both continuity and a break between modernizers and pioneers. Studies of caste and stratification, family, kinship, religion, ritual, which was a concern to pioneers, continued to be studied in a determined fashion by the modernizers. But instead of looking at these issues in context of Indian civilization, the modernizers now studied them in context of the village setting and the changes in the institutions and social structure of rural society. The second feature of this period is structural functionalism. The dominant perspective, which encompassed the theoretical and empirical tendencies in American sociology in the 1950s, was structural functionalism. Under this approach, society is defined as a system consisting of parts such as institutions, groups, roles, associations, organizations, which are interconnected, interrelated, and interdependent. Thus, the continued existence of one component is dependent on that of the others, and for the society as a whole. Structural functionalism is mainly associated with Emil Durkheim, Bronislaw Malinowski, Talcott Parsons, and more specifically with the work of anthropologist A.R. Radcliffe Brown. It is usually applied to the study of particular societies, especially the small-scale society, which is seen as a bounded whole, clearly demarcated and even isolated from its broader social context. The emphasis is on studying the conditions of maintenance of social order in any society. It also demands intensive fieldwork and collection of empirical data rather than armchair theorizing. Structural functionalism was the dominant paradigm in village studies undertaken in India. The village was seen as a bounded entity within which one could study aspects of rural social structure and culture. The studies focused more on the integrative and consensual aspects of social life rather than the conflictual tendencies that existed in society. The studies were conducted through undertaking of intensive field work. The third trend in sociology in India in 1950s and 60s is the focus on modernization and tradition. The 1950s and 60s represented the heyday of modernization theory. According to this theory, development is a linear process in which traditional societies shed their backward customs, traditions, and support technological advancement, industrialization, modern education, urbanization in order to generate wealth and improve the standard of living of its members. In India, public policy tried to bring about rapid economic and social transformations under the project of modernization. The social anthropologists of this generation wanted to study the traditional rural society before it underwent major economic and social changes. Thus, there was an urgency in their work for understanding tradition in Indian context. They also looked at the interaction between traditional and modern social forces and the implications this held for the structuring of Indian society post-independence. Social mobility among the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and backward classes in India also became a major issue of investigation during the 1960s. Surveys and studies of weaker sections of society were undertaken with the objective of highlighting the impact of various development measures and welfare programs of the state on their education, social, and occupational status. The modernizers contributed significantly, both substantively and methodologically, to Indian sociology, but their work has come to be critiqued on various accounts. Some of these criticisms are as follows. First, the structural functionalist approach used to study Indian villages overestimated the degree of consensus as the basis of social order in villages. It did not satisfactorily highlight the acute processes of exploitation and oppression operating at the local level. Second, according to Dhanagre, in this period, the focus was largely on exploration and description, but very little attention was paid to theoretical work, which involves attempts to provide explanations through formulation and testing of hypotheses. Thus, the outcome was an abundance of information produced in response to the what and how questions, but which was not neatly organized and integrated to answer the why questions. Third, village studies failed to look at the linkages of rural society to urban society and to a national context. Fourth, according to sociologist A.R. Desai, the large-scale manufacture of knowledge products comprised of micro-surveys and micro-field reports. These missed the macro picture and failed to analyze the Indian social system in its totality. Fifth, the fieldwork approach tradition involved an immersion into the present. Thus, presentism is dominant in their work, while socio-historical perspective has been largely neglected. Now let us take a look at more recent developments in Indian sociology that took place in 1970s and 80s. The direction that sociology in India took in this period was influenced by the socio-political and intellectual developments in the West. In the West, the disillusionment with techno-industrial structure of society, consumerist, materialist ethos, and militarization had a bearing on the substantive and methodological component of Western sociology. There was a decline of positivism and structural functionalism and a revival of Marxism and critical theory, as well as formulation of a sociology of everyday life, which included phenomenology and ethnomethodology. These new trends influenced Indian sociologists, and they tried to adapt them to the unique character of Indian social reality. This period saw a growing agreement among sociologists over the concerns of the discipline, such as need for relevance, intensive fieldwork, production of empirical studies, historical perspectives, and the demand to root sociology in the uniqueness of Indian tradition and value frameworks. One major influence has been that of Marxism. Under the influence of Marxist paradigm, there was a shift in focus from caste, kinship traditions to macro studies of political economic order within a historical perspective, modes of production, and class structure. Marxism was a preeminent paradigm used by scholars who pioneered a range of peasant studies and agrarian social structure in the 1970s. These peasant studies involved a greater application of conflictual paradigm for social analysis as against the consensual or functionalist perspective that was dominant in the village studies in 1950s and 60s. Closely related with the area of peasant studies is the study of peasant movements, which attracted the attention of some sociologists. The studies of movements of various types, tribal, caste, religious, cultural, peasant, labor, have contributed to a processual rather than a formalistic and analytical treatment of social structure. Over the years, there has been an increasing acceptance of interdisciplinary studies and paradigm mixes, that is, borrowing from various paradigms to understand the object of study. There has also been a diversification of interests and specialization in substantive areas of research and teaching. For instance, there have been developments in industrial sociology, urban sociology, social stratification, sociology of law, studies of professions and gender studies. Now let us look at the process of professionalization and institutionalization of sociology in India. The professionalization of sociology and social anthropology was gradual and slow during its early phase, that is, during pre-1950s. Sociology and social anthropology had beginnings in Bombay and Calcutta. In Bombay, they developed under the leadership of G.S. Ghurye. In Calcutta, they developed under the guidance of B.N. Seal, B.K. Sarkar, K.P. Chattopadhyay and Ramkrishna Mukherjee. At Lucknow University, there was Radha Kamal Mukherjee, D.P. Mukherjee and D.N. Majumdar. Majumdar founded the Ethnographic and Folk Culture Society, which continues to be a prominent body in the field of sociology and social anthropology. Its quarterly journal, The Eastern Anthropologist, is a periodical recognized by international standards. A combined department of sociology and anthropology under the leadership of Iravati Karve was started in 1930s at the Deccan College and Postgraduate Research Institute in Pune. In South India, A.R. Wadia helped institutionalize sociology in Mysore University. In Hyderabad, a full-fledged department of sociology was established at Osmania University in 1946. Christoph von Feuer-Heimendorf and S.C. Dubé were associated with it. A full-fledged department of sociology was started at Delhi University in the 1950s and it was located in the Delhi School of Economics. Srinivasan Panini observed that during the pre-independence period, in spite of being very few in numbers, sociologists and anthropologists had made their presence felt as teachers, researchers and critics. Their influence was perceptible despite the fact that the disciplines were not so well established and that they did not have abundance of funds for conducting research. They achieved a lot in terms of research and data collection. But in its nascent phase of institutionalization, sociology and social anthropology were treated as subordinate social sciences to disciplines such as economics, philosophy and political science. The first department of sociology and civics started in Bombay University in 1919 under the leadership of Sir Patrick Geddes, though here too sociology was first taught as part of an MA course in economics and it was encompassed under the Bombay School of Economics and Sociology. Sociology was then regarded as a soft option which did not require much statistical and analytical rigor as that needed in economics. The real impetus to the growth of sociology came post-1950. This was the phase when the real expansion of sociology began due to a number of factors such as flow of funds into social sciences, standardization of syllabi of sociology, and provision for teaching research methodology and statistics at the master's level for sociology students in universities. The policy orientation in independent India towards economic development and national integration led to recognition of potential of social sciences to contribute to these objectives. The Research Programs Committee of the Planning Commission provided most of the finances required for research projects of social scientists. Substantial aid was provided by University Grants Commission, that is the UGC, for starting new departments and expanding the existing ones under the 5-year development grants. An important step in the institutionalization of sociology was the founding of Indian Council of Social Science Research, that is ICSSR, in the year 1969. The ICSSR contributed immensely to the growth and development of sociology and social anthropology in India. It is an autonomous body and financially independent which has supported several university departments through funds for research projects, seminars, workshops, publication of books and journals, data analysis, and consultancy. It also offers short-term or long-term fellowships for research. In early 1950s, the most prominent professional body in sociology, that is the Indian Sociological Society, ISS, was founded in Bombay. It biannually organizes all India sociological conferences. Its journal, Sociological Bulletin, has been responsible for making visible several trends and debates in the discipline of sociology. Since government wanted concrete data and generalizable findings on social trends in Indian society, sociologists and social anthropologists in India were expected to get acquainted with modern survey research methods and procedures of empirical social sciences developed in the West, particularly in the United States. To meet these demands, courses on research methodology were introduced into the teaching curriculum of sociology and social anthropology in India. These developments helped sociology to gain prestige in an academic environment which was dominated by economics and positivism. While state patronage and financial assistance of American foundations led to growth of social sciences in India, it also meant that research priorities were more or less dictated by the state and policy concerns. Also, it led to unproductive divisive tendencies among the social sciences. There emerged a stiff competition between social science disciplines to get the best projects and assignments from the establishment. This competition hampered any interdisciplinary dialogue or cooperation between the different disciplines in social sciences. Sociology and social anthropology became estranged from economics, history, political science, and philosophy with which they had interacted in the pre-1950 period. As a result, social sciences in India became compartmentalized and narrow. Now let us look at relevance, indigenization, and sociology for India. According to Yogendra Singh, the question of relevance has impinged upon conceptual frameworks, theoretical preferences, and substantive areas of research in sociology. The pioneers were of the view that the ideas, theories, and methods that had developed as part of sociology and social theory in the West were inadequate to satisfactorily describe and explain the Indian social reality. The pioneers were interested in identifying the unique traditions of India and explaining the Indian civilization and contemporary cultural patterns in light of these traditions. They were also committed to make sociology relevant to the national freedom struggle and to the process of building a unique national identity. In the period of the modernizers, that is during 1950s, the felt need was to make sociological studies policy relevant. National political leadership exhorted the social scientists to contribute their skills to facilitate the process of social development. Sociologists themselves felt a sense of responsibility towards addressing the problems faced by a modernizing nation. As part of an effort to contribute to process of development, modernization, and national integration, a series of village and tribal studies, urban surveys, studies of community development were directly commissioned or sponsored by the government. Social engineering was a chief objective of many such studies. Meanwhile, the increasing dependence of sociological studies on concepts and principles devised in the West, especially in American sociology, caused internal tensions in the discipline. Criticism of village studies and the adoption of structuralist functionalist approach in the discipline of sociology in India developed against the background of a growing awareness among the sociologists of the need for indigenization of concepts, methods and objectives. By mid-1960s, the call for indigenization of Indian sociology became fervent. There began a search for a paradigm that could encompass a sociology for India, which was tied to the interpretation of sociological studies of India in terms of the uniqueness of Indian civilization. According to Yogendra Singh, the process of indigenization was also reflected in the processes for institution building in social sciences, the evolution of curricula for sociology teaching, and the operationalization of research problems and programs. Dhanagare says that the call for indigenization had both extreme and liberal proponents. The liberal proponents did not dismiss the usefulness of Western concepts and theories in Indian sociology, but wanted their adaptation to suit the specific socio-cultural reality in India. This camp included those who conducted Indological studies, for example, S.V. Ketkar, B.N. Seal, B.K. Sarkar, and G.S. Ghuriye. On the other hand were the extremists, most prominent being A.K. Saran. In the 1960s, he rejected the possibility of having a social science, including sociology, for understanding Indian society, since these social sciences were fundamentally Western-oriented and ethnocentric. He believed that imitating Western social science would lead to permanent alienation of Indian intellectuals from their culture and heritage. Yogendra Singh states that the debate on sociology for India, which began in late 1950s, grew in two major directions. One was led by Louis Dumont and David Pocock, who sought distinctiveness of Indian society in its principle of hierarchy. It sought to compare the principle of hierarchy with the principle of equality in the West, and then dialectically arrive at the unity of human civilization. This was the structuralist paradigm for understanding Indian society. The second direction was marked by an attempt to keep Indian sociology free from academic colonialism. It was based on the idea that the concepts, methods borrowed from the West do not have much relevance for the social, political, cultural and economic situation of India. For example, F.G. Bailey argued contra Dumont that Indian sociology had to be about empirical studies of actual behavior patterns, rules, and structures rather than invisible underlying overarching principles and ideology. This tension between adoption of theories and concepts developed in the West and the commitment to developing a relevant sociology for India has existed in varying degrees since the inception of sociology in India. According to Yogendra Singh, even when the cognitive impetus has come from abroad, mainly from Western Europe and America, the issues have been increasingly formulated in the historical and cultural framework of the native society. The pressure to Indianize sociology can be seen working through most sociological contributions of the last few decades in India, and this bears out the significance of the social conditioning of theorizing in social science. Now let us sum up this lesson. Sociology in India has its roots in colonial knowledge systems. In the colonial period, there was a massive assimilation of studies on Indian tradition, culture, practices, institutions, religion, villages, etc. Underlying the knowledge base were ideological perspectives and particular interests of European scholars. Accordingly, under colonialism, there developed three approaches to the study of society: the Orientalist, the missionary, and the administrative. Besides colonial thought, there was also an indigenous social thought that had developed among Indian reformers and political thinkers during the colonial period. It was characterized by a blend of Western ideals and a spirit of nationalism and revival of Indian tradition. The colonial and indigenous social thought impinged significantly on pioneer generation of sociology in the 1920s and 30s. The pioneers of Indian sociology were concerned with the study of Indian civilization and uniqueness of Indian tradition. They also wanted sociology to be relevant to nationalism and were less concerned about professionalization of the discipline. In the 1950s and 60s, against the backdrop of the rise of America and American sociology, there arose the generation of modernizers in Indian sociology and social anthropology. They were concerned with the impact that modernization and national development policies had on Indian society. Their work is characterized by intensive fieldwork, structural functionalist paradigm, research on the structure and changes in rural society, which was captured in a multitude of village studies. But gradually, the work of the modernizers came to be critiqued on various accounts. From late 1960s onwards, the dominance of structural functionalism came to be replaced by other theoretical frameworks, such as Marxism, structuralism, ethnosociology, etc. There has also been diversification of substantive areas of research, such as industrial sociology, urban sociology, social stratification, sociology of law, studies of professions, and gender studies. A major part of professionalization of sociology involved the establishment of sociology departments and teaching of sociology at various academic levels in different universities across India. Professional bodies such as ICSSR, UGC, ISS have played an important role in institutionalizing the discipline. Development of syllabi, teaching of research methodology courses, theoretical rigor in sociological research have helped it shed off its tag as a soft option. Foreign aid and state patronage were important sources of funding of research projects which helped sociologists and social anthropologists find a stable footing in academia, but which also led to manipulation of the objectives of study and a growing distance between various social sciences. Integral to the discipline throughout its course of development in India has been the issue of relevance. Attempts were made to develop a sociology for India that is not simply imitative of Western sociology, but which encompasses concepts and theoretical paradigms that are more suited to the study of specific Indian conditions, and also a sociology that is responsive to the needs and crises in society and which can help to facilitate the process of social development and national integration. Accordingly, there has been a drive towards indigenization of sociology and social anthropology in theoretical, methodological, and ideological domains of these disciplines. Based on the above lesson, you can now try to answer the following questions. 1. Describe and compare the three approaches to study of Indian society prevalent in colonial period. 2. What were the basic characteristics of sociological thought in the pioneer generation of Indian sociology? 3. Describe the influence of American sociology on Indian sociology in 1950s and 1960s. 4. List the criticisms of the work of modernizers of Indian sociology. 5. Trace the history of professionalization and institutionalization of sociology as a discipline in Indian academia. 6. Write notes on A. Question of relevance in Indian sociology. B. Indigenization of sociology. C. Debate on sociology for India. You could refer to the following works for studying this lesson in greater detail. Bernard Cohn's Notes on the History of the Study of Indian Culture and Society in the book An Anthropologist Among Historians and Other Essays, published by Oxford University Press in New Delhi. D. N. Dhanagare's Themes and Perspectives in Indian Sociology, published in 1995 in New Delhi by Rawat Publications. Yogendra Singh's Indian Sociology, Social Conditioning and Emerging Concerns, published in 1986 by Vikas Publications in New Delhi. Thank you.